He finally returned home after 15 years, and the moment Wade Hollister stepped onto the porch of the house he built with his own hands, he froze because two pairs of muddy work boots he had never seen before were lined up beside the front door where his wife June's garden clogs used to sit. 15 years. 15 winters away from the woman he kissed goodbye on a Tuesday morning, promising he'd be back by Friday. 15 birthdays missed. 15 Christmases he had counted on a concrete wall with the edge of a spoon. He had walked 4 miles from the bus stop just to give his legs time to remember the road, and his heart time to remember how to hope. But when he lifted his hand to knock on his own front door, the door swung open before his knuckles touched the wood, and two grown men he had never seen in his life were standing inside his house, one holding a coffee mug from his own kitchen cabinet, the other gripping a hammer like he belonged there. They were tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in their late 20s, and they were looking at Wade the way men look at a stranger who has walked up to the wrong address. But this wasn't the wrong address. This was Wade Hollister's house. His name was still on the mailbox. His initials were still carved into the porch beam where he'd knelt down the summer he built it. And behind those two men, through the open doorway, Wade could see the kitchen where his wife June used to hum while she kneaded sourdough, and a life that had kept going without him. He had come home after 15 years to find his wife. But who were these two strangers standing inside his house? Why did they look at him like he was the one who didn't belong? Where was June after all these years? And why were two grown men living under her roof? What had happened to the woman he left behind, and the daughter who was only 3 years old the last time he held her? And when June finally walked through that door and saw the husband she thought she had lost forever, would her heart break open, or would it break in two? Before we begin, share the city you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if stories about second chances, lost love, and the long road home speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe and be part of the journey. Now, let's get into it. Late October settled over Wren Harbor, Maine, with a cold that smelled of salt and wood smoke. The kind of cold that pushed through a thin jacket and reminded a man he had nothing left in the world but the road under his feet. Wade Hollister, 42 years old, walked that road alone. In one hand, a paper bag with everything he owned. In the other, nothing. Just fingers that hadn't touched his wife's face in 15 years. He didn't look like a dangerous man. He looked like a tired one. His hair was grayer at the temples than it had any right to be. His eyes moved slow, the way eyes move when they have spent too many years learning not to hope for anything. A bus had dropped him at the edge of town an hour ago, and he had refused the offer of a ride. He needed those 4 miles. He needed to feel the gravel through his boots and smell the pine and hear the gulls over the bay and remember what it was like to be a man walking home instead of a number walking in circles. 15 years ago, Wade had been a boatwright. He built wooden lobster boats by hand in a workshop behind his own house, the way his father had taught him, and his father before that. He had a wife he loved more than breathing, a 3-year-old daughter named Marlo, with his eyes and her mother's laugh, a life that smelled like sawdust and sourdough and sea air. Then, one Tuesday morning, he kissed June goodbye and drove 2 states away for a 4-day job on a client's yacht. On the second night, a car struck a woman on a dark road 30 miles from where Wade was sleeping. By the third night, a witness had picked his face out of a lineup because his truck was the same color. By the end of the month, a jury that had made up its mind before the first word of testimony had sentenced him to 20 years. He told them he was innocent. They didn't listen. He wrote letters to June every week for 3 years, and she wrote back every week, and every letter she sent was the only thing keeping his heart beating. Then, one night in his 4th year, an older inmate sat down across from him in the yard and said something Wade had never forgotten. "A woman can wait for a ghost for a little while, but if you love her, you don't make her wait for a lifetime." That night, Wade wrote a letter he would regret for the rest of his life. He told June he was guilty. He told her he had lied. He told her to forget him and build a life. He sealed the envelope with tears on his knuckles and mailed it the next morning, and he never wrote to her again. 11 more years passed. Then a cold case unit reopened the file, and DNA from the victim's clothing matched a man who had died in a prison in Ohio. Wade walked out of the gate last Tuesday with a state check, a letter of exoneration, and a silence so loud it made his ears ring. He didn't call. He didn't write. He wouldn't have known what to say. He just got on a bus going east, because east was where June was, and now he was standing on his own porch looking at 2 pairs of work boots that didn't belong to him, and 2 grown men were standing in his doorway, staring at him like he was the trespasser. The taller one, the one with the hammer, spoke first. "Can we help you?" His voice wasn't unkind, it was just careful, the kind of careful a man uses when he's protecting something. Wade opened his mouth. Nothing came out. 15 years of sentences he had rehearsed in a cell, and not one of them fit the shape of this moment. "I'm looking for June," he finally said. His voice cracked halfway through her name like a board under too much weight. "June Hollister." The 2 men looked at each other. A flicker passed between them that Wade couldn't read. The one with the coffee mug set it down slowly on the windowsill, and the one with the hammer lowered it to his side, and for a long second, the only sound on that porch was the wind moving through the red maple June had planted the year Marlowe was born. "Mister," the younger one said carefully, "can I ask who you are?" Wade looked past them into the kitchen he had built with his own 2 hands. He saw the same yellow curtains June had sewn the first summer they lived there, washed 1,000 times and still hanging. He saw a photograph taped to the refrigerator, a younger version of himself holding a baby wrapped in a pale green blanket, 15 years old, curling at the edges, still there. He turned back to the 2 men. "I'm her husband," Wade said, and the hammer slipped out of the younger man's hand and hit the porch boards with a sound that rang all the way down to the bay. The hammer hit the porch, and nobody moved. The younger man's face had gone the color of old paper. The taller one, the one with the careful voice, took half a step forward, not threatening, just steadying himself against something he could not see. His eyes searched Wade's face the way a man searches a map for a road he once knew. "Her husband," he repeated. Not a question, not quite a statement. Something caught between the 2. "Wade Hollister," Wade said. "I built this porch. My initials are on that beam right there." He pointed without looking. He didn't need to look. He knew exactly where they were, because he had carved them the summer June was pregnant, kneeling in the sawdust, promising the baby inside her that she would grow up on a porch her father made. The younger man bent down slowly and picked up the hammer, but he didn't stand back up right away. He stayed crouched there, staring at the floorboards like the floorboards had just told him something he wasn't ready to hear. When he finally rose, his eyes were wet. "Mom's not here right now," he said. Wade's knees almost gave out. He put one hand on the porch rail to keep himself upright, and the wood under his palm was the same wood he had sanded by hand one July afternoon 15 years ago, and his whole body remembered it before his mind did. "Mom. She'll be back in about an hour," the taller one said quietly. "She's doing a delivery in town, wedding cake." He paused. His voice was doing something strange. "Sir, you'd better come inside." Wade stepped through his own front door for the first time in 15 years, and the smell hit him before anything else. Sourdough, butter, the faint scent of lavender from the little sachets June used to make and tuck behind the books on the shelf. His eyes filled so fast he couldn't see. He stood in the entryway with a paper bag in his hand, and tears running down a face that had forgotten how to cry, and he looked at the kitchen table where he had eaten 10,000 breakfasts, and he looked at the framed photograph on the wall of a 3-year-old girl on his shoulders, and he understood for the first time what 15 years actually meant. "Sit down, sir," the taller one said. "Please." Wade sat. The chair creaked the exact way it had always creaked. The 2 men sat across from him, and for a long moment none of them spoke. The taller one folded his hands on the table, the way a man does when he is trying to hold himself together. The younger one kept looking at Wade and then looking away, like he couldn't decide whether looking hurt more or less than not looking. "What are your names?" Wade asked finally. "I'm Rowan," the taller one said. "This is my brother Silas. We've been living here with June for about 2 years now." Wade waited. His heart was beating so hard he could hear it in his teeth. "Our mother was June's best friend from high school," Rowan said. "Delia Marsh. Maybe you remember her." Wade did. A dark-haired woman with a loud laugh who used to come over on Sunday afternoons and help June shell peas on the back steps. He nodded without trusting his voice. "Mom got sick 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer. By the time they found it, there was nothing anyone could do." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Silas and I were both out of the military by then. I was working construction in Portland. Silas had just come home from his last tour. Our dad died when we were kids, so it was just us and Mom. And when Mom went into hospice, the only person who sat with her every single day besides us was June. Silas wiped his face with the back of his wrist. Mom made June promise something before she died, Rowan went on. She made her promise that if Silas and I ever needed a place to land, June would keep a door open for us, and June promised, and Mom died that next Sunday. He took a breath that shook on the way in. About a year later, Silas lost his apartment in Bangor. I lost my job the same month. We didn't have anywhere to go, and June called us and said, "Boys, come home." "We've been fixing the place up for her ever since," Silas said quietly. "The roof, the barn, the oven in the bakery. She wouldn't take rent. She said we were family, and family doesn't pay to sit at the table." Wade's hands were shaking on his knees. He looked around the kitchen again, really looked this time, and he started to see things he hadn't seen before. A fresh coat of paint on the window frames, new hinges on the pantry door, a stack of roofing shingles neatly piled on the back porch. These two men weren't strangers in his house. They were the sons June never had, and they had been taking care of his wife the whole time he had been gone. Then the back door opened, and June Hollister walked into the kitchen carrying an empty delivery tray, humming the same quiet tune she had hummed the morning he kissed her goodbye 15 years ago. She looked up. She saw him. The tray hit the floor. The tray hit the floor, and the sound of it rang through the kitchen like a church bell. Flour dust rose in a pale cloud around June's ankles. She didn't notice. She didn't notice anything except the man sitting at her kitchen table in a worn jacket, with a paper bag at his feet and 15 years of silence in his eyes. Her hand went to her mouth, her knees buckled, and Rowan was out of his chair and behind her before she hit the floor, catching her under the arms the way a son catches a mother. "Wade," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a prayer she had stopped praying a long time ago. Wade stood up slowly. His legs didn't feel like his own. He walked around the table the way a man walks toward a cliff, one careful step at a time, because he knew if he went too fast the whole thing would shatter. When he got to her, he didn't touch her. He didn't dare. He just stood in front of her close enough to feel the warmth of her breath, and he said the only words he had left. "I'm home, June. I'm home." She reached up with one trembling hand and laid it flat against his chest, right over his heart, and she stood there like she was making sure the heart was real. Then she broke. 15 years of grief came out of her in one long sound that wasn't a cry and wasn't a scream, just the sound a soul makes when it finally sets something down. Wade pulled her into his arms and held her the way a drowning man holds a rope, and Rowan and Silas turned their faces to the wall and wept like the boys they used to be. Upstairs, a bedroom door opened. Footsteps came down the stairs, slow and uncertain. A young woman appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, 18 years old, tall, with her father's gray-green eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. Marlo Hollister stood there holding the banister, and she looked at the man holding her mother, and a word she had not spoken out loud since she was 3 years old came out of her mouth in a whisper. "Daddy?" Wade turned, and something in his face broke wide open. That night, June sat at the kitchen table and listened to the whole story. The wrongful conviction, the letters, the lie he had told her in year 4 to set her free, the DNA, the exoneration, the bus ride east. She didn't speak until he was finished, and when she finally did, her voice was quiet and steady, the way water is steady right before it turns into a river. "You wrote that letter to save me." "I wrote it to save both of us," Wade said, "and I've hated myself for it every day since." June looked at him for a long time. Then she reached across the table and took his hand the way she had taken it on their wedding day. "Then stop hating yourself, Wade Hollister, because I never believed a word of that letter, and I never took off my ring." She pulled a chain out from under the collar of her shirt. Her wedding band hung from it, warm from her skin. Wade put his forehead on the table and wept. The next morning he walked out to his old workshop behind the house. The door stuck the way it always did. Inside, every tool he had ever owned was still hanging exactly where he had left it 15 years ago, dusty but oiled, waiting. On the workbench was a small wooden boat, half-carved, the same little boat he had been making for Marlo's 4th birthday the week he was arrested. Someone had kept the sawdust swept around it, Someone had kept the window clean above it. Someone had been coming out here all these years, dusting his tools and oiling the hinges and refusing to let the workshop die. Marlo appeared in the doorway behind him. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. "Mom used to bring me out here on my birthday every year," she said quietly. "She told me I should come visit your hands. She said a man's hands were in the tools he used." She swallowed hard. "She said you'd know the song." Wade closed his eyes, and from somewhere deep in a place the prison had never been able to reach, he found the lullaby he had written for his daughter when she was a baby, a little melody about a boat in a harbor and a light in the window that never went out. He hummed it in the cold workshop air, and Marlo set the coffee down on the workbench and sat on the floor beside her father, and neither of them said another word for a long time. The reckoning came 3 days later, on a Wednesday afternoon, when a silver SUV rolled up the gravel drive and a man in a tailored coat stepped out holding a leather folder. Calvin Ostrander was a regional developer who had been trying to buy the Hollister property for 4 years. He had a polite smile and an expensive watch and a purchase agreement that was supposed to expire at the end of the month. He walked up the porch steps like he had walked up them a dozen times before, because he had. Wade was sitting on the porch when Calvin arrived. He stood up slowly. Calvin faltered. "I'm sorry. I was looking for Mrs. Hollister." "You're looking at her husband," Wade said. Calvin's polite smile did not move, but something behind his eyes rearranged itself very quickly. "Mr. Hollister, I wasn't aware." "A lot of people weren't," Wade said. "I understand you've been pressuring my wife to sell the land my grandfather cleared." "I wouldn't call it pressure, sir. I'd call it an opportunity. Your wife has bills. Your daughter has college tuition. This property is worth more than a bakery can bring in." Wade reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. He opened it slow enough for Calvin to see the state seal on the letterhead. "This is an exoneration settlement from the state of Maine," Wade said. "It's enough to pay off this house 3 times over. It's enough to send my daughter to any college she wants. And it's enough for me to tell you politely that you will not be setting foot on this porch again." He handed the purchase agreement back without looking at it. "Tell your investors the Hollister place is not for sale. Not this year. Not next year. Not ever." Calvin Ostrander did not argue. Men like Calvin never argue when the numbers stop working. He nodded once, walked back to his SUV, and drove away. And that was the last time anyone in Wren Harbor heard from him about that piece of land. The weeks that followed were slow and quiet and holy. Wade slept in the workshop for the first 2 weeks because he didn't feel he had the right to sleep anywhere else. Then June came out one night with a blanket over her arm and took him by the hand and led him back to the house without saying a word. He paid off the mortgage. He signed a small cottage on the back of the property over to Rowan and Silas, because he said any man who had kept his wife safe for 2 years had earned a permanent place on Hollister land. Marlo deferred college 1 semester, not forever, just long enough to learn what her father's voice sounded like at breakfast and lunch and dinner and at the kitchen table late at night when neither of them could sleep. And then it was Thanksgiving. The table had 6 chairs. Wade at the head where he had always sat, June at his right where she had always sat, Marlo across from her mother, Rowan and Silas on the long side, and 1 empty chair at the foot of the table set with a plate and a folded napkin, because June said there should always be a seat for whoever came next. The first snow of the season was falling outside the window over the bay. The wood stove was warm, the turkey was on the platter, and Wade Hollister, a man who had spent 15 years eating off a metal tray in a concrete room, looked around the table at the wife who had never stopped loving him, the daughter who had grown up on a lullaby, and the 2 young men who had kept the roof over his wife's head when he could not, and he tried to say grace. "Thank you," he started, his voice caught. "Thank you for—" He couldn't finish. His shoulders shook. June reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for every road that led him home. Thank you for the people who loved us when we couldn't love ourselves. Thank you for the chair that waited. And thank you most of all for the second chance nobody thought was coming." "Amen." "Amen," said Rowan. "Amen," said Silas. "Amen, Daddy," said Marlo. And outside the window, the snow kept falling soft and steady over Wren Harbor, covering the workshop roof and the red maple and the porch beam with the initials carved into it, And for the first time in 15 years, Wade Hollister closed his eyes at a table full of people who loved him and understood what the word home actually meant. Some men come home to the life they left behind. Wade Hollister came home to a life that had kept a chair open for him, even when it had every reason not to. He lost 15 years to a lie he didn't tell. He lost a letter to a lie he did. But he didn't lose his wife. He didn't lose his daughter. He didn't lose the workshop behind the house, or the initials on the porch beam, or the lullaby that had kept a little girl company on every one of her birthdays. Because love, the real kind, the quiet kind, the kind that sweeps sawdust off a workbench for 15 years without being asked, doesn't keep score. It just keeps the door open. And sometimes, if you're lucky and if you're brave enough to walk the last 4 miles on foot, the door opens before you even get a chance to knock. If this story touched your heart tonight, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one again. Your support is what keeps these stories alive, and it means more than you know. And before you go, I want to leave you with one question to sit with tonight. If the person you loved most in this world walked back through your door after 15 years of silence, after you had already learned how to live without them, already learned how to fall, asleep without their voice in the next room, would your heart be brave enough to let them back in? Would you be able to forgive the lost years? Or would the walls you built to survive the waiting be too tall to take down? Share your answer in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from tonight, and tell us about a time someone came back into your life when you had already stopped hoping they would. Your story might be the very thing another heart out there needs to hear. May God bless you. May He keep the door of your home open to love, and may every chair at your table someday be filled by the people who were always meant to sit in it. Good night.